Very much for joining us today. Our subject is one that personally I was not quite sure of how to approach it, although it's one of the most important things, one of the most prevalent things that we are confronted with today on a societal level, and that is the subject of burnout. And I am very blessed to have two wonderful panelists with me today, and I will uh, give them the opportunity to introduce themselves because inevitably they will do a much better job of introducing themselves than I could ever do. And so, Evelyne, perhaps if we could start with you. Evelyne, thank you very much for joining. And if you could introduce yourself, and my question, just to get you in the right frame of mind, how would you define the difference between burnout and bore out?
So, hi everybody. Thank you for the invitation, Mike. My name is Evelyne. Just to give a brief overview of who I am or why I'm here today. To me, it is very important to talk about the topic because for me personally, it is still a process of working through it because I'm still in the middle of my recovery process from burnout. So I made it my personal mission to talk about it openly because it provides a growth opportunity for myself, but also an opportunity to connect with other people and to let them know what it is like, particularly if they haven't gone through it themselves, and or if they have, loved ones, friends with similar issues and they might not know how to relate to it or how to understand how to deal with it. Yeah, your question is super interesting, Mike. What is the difference between a burnout and a bore out? For me personally, I've been suffering from a burnout. So classically, something that I was working in a field that was very demanding, that I enjoyed a lot, that I loved doing. However, there were a few factors that really made certain interactions, certain types of interactions with other people very difficult. I think burnout in general has to do with interactions, with relationships between people, because I would argue from my perspective that unless you're really working on your own with nobody else, with no other human being involved, it's a different story. But there's always some element of, I would say, disappointment and frustration that eventually sucks out so much energy that you start to burn out from the thing that you burned for. I hope that wasn't too abstract. In terms of bore out, I haven't experienced that myself. However, I do have a close friend of mine who suffered from that. And to give you an idea of what it was like, she was very excited when she started her job. She was super motivated. She was doing additional courses, training herself, also in her free time to become even better at what she was doing and to gain more skills, more competencies. But the sad fact was that she was not able to use any of that. She was not able to use any of that in the work context. She was not getting any tasks that were challenging to her. She didn't get, at the same time, any type of assistance that she would have needed from more experienced people, like a mentor or just a buddy who would help get into the field and who would help get to know the product she was working on. And so she felt very much left alone and she felt very much ignored. And definitely not challenged enough. And she tried to keep herself busy over a very long time, over months and months. She tried to keep herself busy to find things that she could do to provide challenges for her. But unfortunately, at the end, this was not enough and it didn't really end well. And she actually got a depression from that. So it's you could argue that burnout and bore out are two sides of a coin. They might both end up in a depression. It's definitely creating a state in a person that is very dangerous and detrimental from a mental health and an overall physical health perspective. And there is always, I would argue, a social or relationship type of component in it, because we hardly ever work by ourselves on our own. We're always interacting with other people. And from my and her experience, I can say that the relationship we have at the workplace with colleagues, and particularly with our bosses, is very crucial and essential.
Okay, thank you very much, Evelyne. Carolina, before I give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, I'd like to explain a situation. I'm going to give you the title of doctor right now, because I want you to come up with a prognosis based on your definition of what burnout is, of whether it might have actually taken place. It was 8 years ago. I was in the process of building an educational portal that was a total disaster, where I completely underestimated the work that was required. I thought all you have to do is show up and people were willing to throw money at you. It doesn't work that way. I realized there were actually about 6 or 7 steps before people are willing to give you money for all of this. And of course, it's one of those cases where you turn around and all the people who were supposed to work with you, you know what? They're long gone. And so this was a situation that I found myself in, and coming from a culture where you think, well, you just work harder because you're not working hard enough. That's what we've been conditioned. And so I got to the point of just trying to get to the finish line, finishing the content, and at least being able to cross something off the list. But there was, and thank goodness I was able to move past this. But there was one instance that took place where I was having difficulties with my wisdom teeth, and they were saying that, well, actually you should have them removed. You probably should have done this a long time ago, but now that you've realized there's pain. And I was happy, because this gave me an excuse to get past this mess that I had just finished creating. Is that burnout?
If I may, I would say yes. There are different stages of burnout, and people could look that up if they wanted to, depending on how it's classified. There are either 9 steps or 12 steps of this burnout classification steps. And something like that, feeling some sort of release, or feeling relieved by the fact that you get an opportunity to nope yourself out of the situation that is obviously very difficult and very frustrating, can be one sign of burnout. Perhaps not yet the most severe stage, luckily, but definitely a good indicator to see that, hey, something is really up. If I'm happy to deal with physical pain or physical illness, just so that I don't have to deal with this other mess at work, for instance, or in your family life, or whatever the situation might be, then I would say this is a great indicator for oneself to know, there's something wrong. Maybe I shouldn't keep on doing what I've been doing so far.
Yeah, as it was, I was able to recognize that where I was at that point, and I came to the conclusion that I always have a choice. Might not always like the choice that I have, but I have a choice, and forgiving myself was one of the choices. And so I decided to go that route. Sorry, Carolina, I threw something in your direction and that was not quite fair. I apologize for that. Perhaps if you'd like to introduce yourself, and feel free to share whatever thoughts you might have on the subject that you find is appropriate for you.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Mike. I wasn't sure that was, I wasn't even aware that you were throwing it at me.
No, that's right.
So I didn't even catch on it. But yeah, so thank you for inviting me. I'm also, I once heard it described by someone as being a burnout survivor. So that's also what I am. It's been past me a few years, but it's left such a mark. It feels like that point for me was a big mark in my life. It absolutely signaled a turning point. And many times I see the life before the burnout and the life after the burnout. That's how intense it ended up being. And again, now if you wanted to ask me, if what you were feeling was burnout, I don't think I only know burnout from my own perspective of it. I have not studied it or looked into it very much, I'll be honest. But I remember wanting an excuse like that and thinking, I wish I could get sick, or I wish something could happen, because then it wouldn't be my responsibility. It wouldn't be my fault. I would have an excuse. So that is definitely something that I remember experiencing, not being grateful for it, but wishing for it.
You answered my question. So the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Maybe piggybacking on that of what you were saying there, Carolina, when you say life beforehand and life afterwards, so what is that difference for you now?
The difference before is being so unaware of what was happening. I did not even recognize it when it happened, when I crashed. It was just, I was just living life, everything was normal, I was just stressing myself out, and that was it. And now, after the burnout, there is a lot more awareness of what are the limits, what are the signals, when can you tell that something is, when am I being warned by my own body and my own mind that there is something going on that I need to pay attention to? Because as you also, and I'm going to go back to also something that you mentioned, that you consider always back to yourself, that it's up to you, and this is something you always think, this is something I've created, this is something that I now have to figure out, this is something that I'm not going to ask for help, nobody can help. There's a sense of hopelessness that you need to sort the situation out for yourself, and this just adds to the despair. So and I guess I would have a little bit of a different context, because most people experience burnout in a work context, but I wasn't really in a workplace at the time at all. I was finishing a master's thesis, and I'd started doing an online specialization in data science at the same time. Then I was involved in other projects online, just volunteer things relating to transition and permaculture. And I had made my personal life into a mess and put myself into such emotional stress that I was able to make myself burn out without even being in a workplace. So there was a lot even more sense of, it's not the situation, but you have put yourself in this situation. In that case, there was a lot of blame that was actually on myself, because I had chosen to put myself in all of those situations. And then now it felt, now it's your responsibility, you have to get out of it. And I did not want to ask for help.
Wow. Evelyne, listening to Carolina and thinking about this idea of being on your own, you're by yourself. For me, that is a form of alienation. And I truly believe that this is one of the biggest problems that we have in our society today, and it's not something that came from one day to the next. I'd be curious to find out from your side whether you see a relationship between that concept of burnout and that feeling of alienation.
Definitely. I mean, I can absolutely relate to what Carolina said. Regardless of whether it's, you know, your private situation, your study situation, or your work situation, or maybe you're caring for a family member, you know, who's very sick. Regardless of what situation you put yourself into, there's always seemingly a challenge of recognizing one's own boundaries, of setting limits to one's responsibility, or to recognizing the responsibility and the choice that you mentioned, Mike, that we have in any given situation. Whether it is I have to push through and I have to try harder, which is definitely something I can relate to. I put myself into the work situation and I noticed that things weren't going great, but I thought, oh, if I keep on holding on, it'll get better at some point. And at the same time, there was this alienating effect that I got further and further away from myself. I think the main problem was in the beginning, or at various points, I did notice that I was not feeling so great mentally and physically. I did notice that I was getting more agitated more easily, that I was getting more irritated more quickly by just minor things, that it was harder and harder to keep up a good mood inside myself. And at the same time, I tried to push this aside and to push through. And so there was this element of detaching myself from my own inner experience, from the sensations and the emotions I was feeling, just to be more effective and more efficient. And I think this sense of, you know, driving productivity, doing more, achieving more, has greatly added to that, and has added to that sense of first alienating myself from my own inner world, which then over time, as I kept on ignoring that, added to a sense of being alienated from the outside world completely. So at some point, it gets so intense that you, as a person suffering from burnout, you might not even be able to relate properly to the outside world anymore. You get numb in a sense. And anything that you cared about before, be that in a professional sense, or be that in, you know, private activities that you used to enjoy, like hanging out with friends, going to a concert, listening to music, all of these things suddenly at some point, you know, lost meaning. They were becoming meaningless. They were becoming, I don't know, empty, basically. I guess empty is the best word to describe it. And that at some point was the realization and the turning point for me, that my emotions were completely out of whack, and I was just, you know, in some sort of crying fit at some point, and B, I wasn't able to enjoy anything anymore, not even the things that I knew in the past were giving me joy. And so this is the real you know, screaming red flag indicator that something is seriously off and something seriously needs to be done.
Carolina, you're nodding your head completely in approval.
Yes, this is something, yes, I can relate to this. And then the problem is also after. So for me, there was a very clear point when I was actually abroad at a program at the time, and there were deadlines. And one day at night, there was a deadline. I absolutely had to submit something, and I could not do it. I could not do anything. I was staring at the computer screen. My brain could not process this. And I shut it down. I went to bed, and I did not get out of bed the following day. I stayed in there entire day. I was in an environment that I didn't even know the people. It was people that were there for that program, and they were trying to help. I didn't want to talk to anyone. And then I got back to Portugal, where I normally live, and I could not do anything. Nothing. This feeling of nothing giving you joy. You cannot even do it. You cannot listen to a song. It will annoy you. I remember trying to. I then stayed with my family for a while, and I remember my mother trying to distract me and watch a movie with me. I was sitting there. I could not watch this movie. I just wanted to get up and walk out. And the only thing you can do is despair inside of your own head, at least for me at the time. Even making a sentence, I did not want to talk to anyone. I did not want to hanging out, as Evelyne, you just mentioned. Absolutely not. This would take away whatever little energy I have, and I don't have any. I don't want to explain to anyone what is happening right now. I don't want to, because that would force me to talk about these things that I'm running away from. I don't ever want to, and I'm just inside my head thinking about them all the time anyway. So it's like there is no escape from them, but thinking about talking about them to someone is somehow worse. And just, you don't want to articulate it in a sentence. You don't want to talk about it. It does help that there is company beside you, but you really don't want to. Yeah, nothing can. I just wanted to shut my brain off somehow. So I just want to be asleep, or I wanted to watch something so addictive and so sensationalist that you cannot not pay attention to it. It cannot be like a quality movie that makes you think and reflect about life. It has to be something utterly meaningless that can just distract you and turn off your brain so that you are quiet. That's the most quiet that I could get at the time. Yeah, so absolutely relating to what Evelyne is just saying there.
I was feeling quite similarly. The hardest part was for myself to realize the state that I was in. And then, getting some sort of help from somebody, whether that's a friend or your partner, if you happen to have one, or a doctor that you trust, or some other type of therapist, for instance. That was really, really challenging. And the most challenging part there was really finding the energy, getting the last bits of energy, whatever you have, to drag yourself out of bed, to get yourself ready, and to contact somebody. Even though I knew in my head what steps I needed to take, it cost so much energy just to approach this. Like, it sounds crazy for a person who's never experienced that, but if getting out of bed, getting a shower and getting dressed is already challenging and costing you so much energy, how do you manage to get the energy for calling somebody, talking about a difficult topic, explaining your situation, that you're not fully understanding yourself in that situation, and doing something about it? So the hardest part about the burnout is really not having any energy, but needing to take whatever last bits of energy you have left to actually get action, to get going, to get help. For me, that was the hardest part. And I think people who suffer a complete burnout with, the most severe consequences, where people actually lack the physical energy to get up or to eat by themselves, which unfortunately happens sometimes. It is so immensely difficult. So this part, I never thought that this could happen. I remember a time in December, January, when I decided to go on a walk, because going on a walk, you don't have to talk with anybody, you don't have to read anything or think anything, you just walk. I decided to go on a walk, and after 15-20 minutes, I was completely exhausted, like physically exhausted, and it felt as if I had run for at least 10 kilometers. This level of exhaustion physically, and then mentally, something you said, Carolina, with staring at the screen and not being able to do anything or process the information that you were seeing. I had the same thing. It went even that far that I couldn't even look at or touch a computer because it was strenuous. It was so much information that was in there that I wanted to have distance. I couldn't really bear to open it, and checking emails, for example, was a complete impossibility. So getting this time away from distractions and from things that give you input, mental input, and that force you to process information, which at that point is really, really hard, is something super essential. So I would hope that from, you know, speaking about these things and how we felt, that people who have, you know, friends or loved ones suffering from a burnout might recognize how they're feeling, might recognize that this is a serious problem, that they definitely need help in whatever shape or form they can manage. And it's not that those people or we didn't want to. We wanted to do something, we wanted to change something, but we were, I would argue, seriously incapacitated. If, you know, the mental energy is gone and you cannot read and process information anymore, and the emotional energy is gone, so that you only feel empty or a form of hopelessness and despair. And if your reasoning capacities are gone, you know that you've been able to have challenging conversations or discussions before, and now you can't even hold a short small talk conversation because it's so strenuous. I think those are all symptoms that show the seriousness of the condition and the need for the body, the need for the human being as a whole, mentally, spiritually, and cognitively, to rest and somehow recover and reset, to get to this point of reset.
Yeah, and also going to add to something that you said about being able to recognize the signs in your friends and in your loved ones. One thing that was very important to me at the time, I think, was I did not want to talk to anyone, but there was a presence. People were still present. Even I was blessed with great friends because I wasn't talking to them. I was not responding at anything. I would not pick up calls. I would not answer a text message. So they could barely know that I was alive. But they wouldn't stop really trying once in a while. And then they didn't hold me responsible for it. No one, when I came back and explained, I'm sorry for my behavior, because it's not the behavior of a good friend. You don't even you don't reply to other people, and you don't ask how they are doing. I wasn't asking. It's like I didn't care. The things that I normally care about, I did not care about anything. And when I came back, no one held me. So this idea of responsibility, nobody held me responsible for it. And it was such a contrasting feeling to what I was feeling before. So just sometimes thinking about how we cannot imagine maybe if what other people are going through, but still just this sense of being compassionate and letting them be there and waiting for them to come back into their own and giving them the time to explain in their own terms. This was something that was so important at the time. And I just wanted to put this out there because I think we're living in such a fast world, and we're used to wanting things from each other and to expect things from each other. And sometimes the best thing that you can give someone is not to expect anything from them.
Thank you both. Very often when we have meaningful conversations there, all of a sudden you're reflecting on that of what's being said, and you're thinking about your own situation. I wonder if maybe we confuse, and I'm being very reflexive here, if we confuse activity with purpose. In other words, this idea that we stuff as much as we can into that full day, and because we were able to fill the entire day, then it was purposeful. Your thoughts?
Carolina, I let you go first because I already talked that much.
No, it's really, I think we do this. I would just say out of first reaction is yes, we do this. There is this idea that a lot of activity, that being very busy means that there's some association with it of being productive, of being successful. You can be very busy and not be productive at all, or your activities leave no impact. And sometimes we are just trying to do all these things out of a genuine sense of this needs to happen or this is good for the world. But because we're trying to show up at so many things at the same time, we end up not showing up that well for at least most of them. And this is something, I'm still guilty of this. I'll just confess.
Me too.
That even after this entire lesson, there's always a sense of wanting to do a lot. But I just think that going through the experience helps you maybe stop a little bit before you crash. Now you know how to recognize, okay, this day was very long. I am now feeling this way. And this is not because I need to push through more. I don't need to push through. I don't need to go through 5 more weeks of this before I will have an impact or before I will produce something meaningful. And sometimes it's about taking a break and taking a step back and reflecting and then choosing what to let go of. Because I don't know, Evelyne, if you probably had the same also experience that you then at that point, you ended up having to let go of a lot.
And I'm still struggling with it. It's one of the hardest things to do because it's so crazy. In job life, in work life, I'm very good at prioritizing. I mean, that's part of the thing that I do. Defining criteria and then figuring out what needs to be prioritized, what is the most important thing, what needs to be done first. Funnily enough, for myself, that is not really the case for my overall life or my private life. And so I think I was not that aware of my own priorities to begin with. That in the way that, work life and all the things that I think I need to do and all the things I need to produce, I put this on a much higher pedestal and thought that these are the most important things, and whatever else comes afterwards is not that important, like rest and digest. Definitely not a thing. Until you realize, oh well, obviously, the pushing through and the achieving more, getting used to achieving more, getting used to doing more, to pushing your boundaries ever more. This is also what athletes do because this is the way how they train and how they get better at what they're doing. So I think I was guilty, or still am guilty, of having the same type of mindset. The more you push through, the more you achieve, the more you expand your boundaries. Unfortunately, us being human beings with limitations, with limited energy, with limited time on this earth, we cannot do that infinitively. There are boundaries, and I think recognizing that there are boundaries and recognizing the need to rest and to step back, and as you said, to let go of certain things and to not sign up for this one more thing, and to, oh, I'm not doing this one more thing because this one more thing is just taking 5 more minutes, and then you end up spending 2 more hours and you did 10 more things than you originally intended. Like, this is the thing that I used to do. Recognizing that and stopping yourself and not falling into the same trap again. These are the biggest challenges, and not getting ahead of yourself in this way was just so incredibly difficult, and I still struggle with reprioritizing. And as you said, Mike, purpose. Where do I find purpose? I came across a very, very interesting podcast once where they were talking about purpose, purpose with capital P and purpose with non-capital P. And we might see all the challenges in the world of things that need to be done, of good that we could do, how we could contribute. All of that would count towards capital P purpose. The big things, because we have challenges in our world. We have whatever climate change and this and that and social inequality, and we want to do good and change something and have an impact. But at the same time, we have our own private lives. We need to sustain ourselves as human beings in order to be able to actually create impact, in order to be able to show up for things to do and for other people. And so the non-capital P would be the type of purpose that helps us find meaning in the more mundane actions that we take in everyday life, that help us connect with other people. And I think this is something that we potentially underestimate and underappreciate. Taking time for yourself, stepping back, doing something on your own, or taking the time to do something with your friends, because that relaxation time is actually not downtime. It's not unproductive time. It actually, in the end, adds up to your energy, to your power, to your creativity, to your inspiration, to do something in work life or the things that you care about. And actually, it's not only having an effect on yourself, it's actually also giving energy back to your friends. It's also inspiring them. So if we really, take a different perspective on that and think about it, taking rest and relaxation time, particularly with others, is restoring energy in a way that we're not usually able to grasp. It has these ripple or domino effects, and we just don't usually think about it, and we don't see it, and so we don't perceive it as productive or meaningful or purposeful. That was one of the biggest lessons I learned over the past months.
One thing that at the time, also adding to this, really helped me and continues to help me every day are some notions from Buddhist thought, in particular the one about being compassionate to yourself. Because even if you want the world to become better for others and you want to help others, if you do not help yourself first, then you are not in a state that you can help others, or that you will meaningfully be able to show up in a way that you can help someone in your full way, or with the peace and mental capacity that you need. So these ripple effects, as you just mentioned, of being able to spending time with your friends is being compassionate. I am tired, I want to do something fun, I will spend time with my friends, and because I have done this, then the next few days you can now help someone so much better. If you just push through it, no, I will not do this, this is not meaningful, then the following day you can have a situation where you are trying to help someone, but you have a reaction that you are not expecting. You mentioned annoyance. Sometimes you are not able to empathize as well if you're not if you're in a state of stress and tiredness. You just, whether in some other cases you might be able to do better deep listening to someone, or be more empathic, or even to have more of a buffer if they have sometimes people have adverse reactions and there's conflict that arises because there's a misunderstanding, and just having the capacity to not react. This requires being rested and peaceful.
Maybe if I can interject, I think one thing we haven't talked about overtly so far is this idea of vulnerability, the ability to be open and accepting of whatever might come our way. And when I look at my journey, there was a certain point where I knew that I needed to make a change, and I wanted to embrace the world, and I wanted to help everybody because I felt that that was really my calling. But then I came to the conclusion that people were willing to abuse the help that I was providing because, one, they couldn't do it themselves, so they found somebody to do it. Or secondly, oh, well, then I'll just go ahead and take advantage of this person's good nature and exploit it. So within this dualistic world that we've been conditioned to, either it's good or bad or open or closed, becomes quite a struggle, or it's become quite a struggle for me in still trying to be open, regardless of whatever comes your way. And very often it's phrased as being resilience, and certainly resilience is part of it. But I think a lot of it has to do, and I'm just piggybacking, Carolina, what you were saying, that you have enough faith in yourself that regardless, that you will, in spite of everything that's happened, that you will figure out a way to make sure that you're not abused, that you ensure that the things that you're working on are purposeful and they're not just activities to fill the day, because that's, once you start with activities, it's the sunk cost fallacy. Well, I can't stop now. And so we just keep on going, regardless of whether it's still meaningful or not. And that is, nobody has a monopoly on that quality. That seems to be human nature. But then the question is, based upon all these facts all these things that are taking place, how easy is it to end up in a situation that you know is going to happen? Like, you've seen that film more than once and you know how it ends. How do you stop it before you say, well, I'm watching the film, let's go ahead and go to the end? Any thoughts? Carlia?
I think sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes we can't. I think as humans, we as much as we want to say that we made a mistake once, we will not do it again. Sometimes you can recognize the signals and still do it again. You can still find yourself again in a situation that you said, I will never be here again. I will never be here again anymore. And somehow you found yourself there. But maybe then your reaction when you recognize that this is the situation again, and that you've driven yourself to it, your reaction will be different because of all the past experiences that you've had. And I think this openness is so important, of just keeping an open heart, because then if we start being dominated by our negative experiences, we won't have this, this open heart to let good things also come our way, because we are assuming a result before even trying it out. But there is an element here of it's a little bit of a balance of having to keep it open and trying things out and letting people in, but then also being more aware and being able to see when something feels extractive, when something feels just toxic, when something feels like too much, and then being able to be honest. Also, this honesty, I think, is important. Being honest with someone, saying, I cannot do this, and you do not need to to point a finger. You can step back and from your own perspective, in a way, just be honest and say, I'm sorry, I cannot help. I'm sorry, I cannot commit more time. This is how I'm feeling. This is my reason. It's a little bit, again, of responsibility, but not for owning things that you don't need to own, responsibility for taking a step back. And just, again, for what Evelyne said is so important, just I'll keep going back to it, just having the reflective time. If you have time to reflect, you will more easily be able to watch a situation, step back a little bit, watch it a little bit from afar and recognize it for what it is. And avoid maybe finding yourself at the end of the movie. Like you see the movie, now I'm just going to find myself closer to the end. Maybe you are still in the same movie, but you don't see it 5 minutes from you don't recognize it 5 minutes from the end. You recognize it half an hour from the end. And that could be a big difference in an overall picture, maybe.
And I think that's a process, right? This is a learning process. And I've noticed for myself that, the time I need to reflect and respond rather than automatically react to something that triggers me has grown, has gotten bigger. So you get better the more you do this over time to recognize the movie earlier on. And that is, I think, quite hopeful. It doesn't, as Carolina said, it doesn't prevent us from not ending up in similar situations or doing things again and again, but we recognize it earlier on. And that is improvement. And maybe over years or maybe over decades, we're actually really good at recognizing things, by the first few signs, and we immediately know, no, we're not going down that route. We're not ending up in that movie. We're playing in another one. And having the guts also for oneself to say, no, I'm definitely not doing that. Nope. Hell no. I'm not interested in that. I think this has not only to do with reflective capacity and recognizing signs, but also with a sense of self-worth and knowing your place, knowing what you're willing to do, and definitely knowing what you're not willing to do, and communicating that. So this is also one of the takeaways that I had from this experience.
I've come to the conclusion that purpose includes an equal amount of both pleasure and pain. Without having the pain, or at least the setback, or the perceived failures, because there's no such thing. Failure just means a setback, and to be able to take it as such, I've come to the conclusion that I prefer to have a life with both pleasure and pain instead of having neither nor. And I'm directly speaking of personal experience. When you end up in a work situation where you cannot afford to have emotions, because the emotions deflect you from being able to defend yourself and defend the people that are working for you within a corporate environment. And in fact, I always say it took me a good year to get the corporate poison out of my system after deciding to get off of that train. But one of the conclusions that I've come to on a meta level is that a lot of this that we're talking about are based on structures. We're talking about societal structures. We're talking about relationship structures, whatever it may be, depending upon the situation. And if we believe in the faith of the human being, and if we believe that if the conditions are right, then we have an opportunity to do something good, then following that adage, we change the structures, we change our behaviors. and following that, and I'd be really curious from both of you to find out if I was able to give you both a magic wand, which you already possess, you don't need to get it from me, to change things within that of what we see around us, looking at it in whatever perspective it may be. I call it structures. You might look at it from a different way, knowing full well how important it is what we've been talking about so far. What would you do?
If I may, first, I think structures is a really cool concept, or a really useful concept in this regard. I would argue that it's not about changing the structures to change behaviors. I would say it's the other way around, changing your own behavior in order to change the structures. And for a very long time, I wasn't getting that. I thought that I need to change the system somehow, so that the system gives, rise to the conditions that would be needed for people to act and react in a certain way. And to a degree, I still think that's true. However, you cannot easily change the system. The system can only change if you put your input in a form of different behavior in it. That's at least what I realized. So if I change my behavior, it sort of starts to tear at the structure of the system that I'm in. And then you can start to play with it. And at the end of the day, this is the only power and responsibility that we have, that we hold as individuals anyways. You can only change your own behavior and then see how the environment reacts to that. And as far as pain and pleasure goes, Mike, I think you're right. I think we need both. I think it's part of the human, condition to feel pleasure and pain. But what we need to figure out for ourselves, and that definitely goes for myself as well, what is the right ratio of pain and pleasure in our life? Are we just hedonistic and go for pleasure only without any pain, without any opportunity then to grow and develop in other directions because we're so comfortable in our environment that we're in? Or are we turning into masochists, just searching for pain to grow as much as possible and never be steady? I think both extremes are not healthy or helpful over the long run. I think we need to find our individual good ratio between the two so that we function at our best.
Well,
Maybe if I just, sorry, Carolina, I stepped on your words. I was just going to add real quick to that of what Evelyne said. When I talk about pain, I'm not talking about self-flagellation. I am talking about disappointment. I'm disappointment on all forms it may be. Disappointment in yourself, disappointment with the people that you're with sometimes, disappointment with the situation you find yourself in. It could be all kinds of things, but to avoid that pain means that you're closing yourself off from opportunities. And I'm just piggybacking, Carolina, what you were talking about, that open heart and the ability to take things in, which means that we're open. That means we're vulnerable. Sorry, I jumped in and you wanted to say something.
No, there's so many interesting, important things being said. But if I was to choose one thing around the magic wand, and this is nothing new. We were talking about it just before we started recording, about how inner and outer are related. Is just making it more widespreadly shared, making it more widespread that inner and outer are connected. So what is happening inside changes your view of the outside world in a way that you project that into it, and that what you take in from the outside, so from your environment, has a different meaning depending on how you're feeling inside. So And there are so many people talking about this. We're always talking about change, with SDGs, but now some people have come forward sharing about inner development goals. If you want to work on these sustainable development goals, here are inner development goals you also need. You cannot have one without the other. So there are a lot of people already. There have been people saying this for so much time. I just like it to be more, and I had to go through the pain and the process of transformation through destruction to understand it for myself. But it would be good if maybe it became a more widely known idea that not so many people had to go through the process of transformation through destruction to start working on these things, on inner and on all of this inner work, you want to call it.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Carolina. I was just thinking of the, wide-known saying, change yourself to change the world. I thought that this was such a cliche thing to say, and I didn't fully grasp the meaning before, I must admit. Only through the burnout was I able to understand what it really means. I need to take care of my inner world first, and I need to change the way I relate to the world and to other people, and to expectations and to challenges and to my own limits, in order to understand how I better relate to the outside world and what impact I eventually have on the outside world. And there are so many people, institutions also thinking about impact measurement. Everything nowadays is about, monitoring and evaluating and measuring the impact that you have. But what we forget to see is that we do not have indicators for everything. We cannot measure everything. There are things that are, intangible, but still of great value. And we were just having a conversation, the three of us today. We don't know how many people actually see or listen in to what we're saying. We don't have an idea. But if we just reach one person out there who can relate to what we're saying, who can make use of the things that we're saying, maybe that changes the interaction that person has with another person in their lives. And then maybe this person is affecting another person that they know in their lives. And so this is, again, coming back to this ripple effect. We cannot see it. We cannot estimate it. We cannot calculate it. We can just put it out there with the best of our intentions and hope that people take it up. And I think that is meaningful in and of itself. It doesn't need to be measured in any traditional sense of the word.
This has, where do I start to describe this conversation? I have so many takeaways from that of what you both said that acted not only as a confirmation to that of what I've been feeling for a very long time, but in the way that you expressed it, in the way that you express things, and in such a beautiful form, I feel humble, and I'd like to just thank you both for this opportunity. Following that of what Evelyne was saying, yes, we cannot measure whether the effectiveness of the message that we're bringing across. But here I can only speak for myself. I don't need that. I know what is real. I know what is important. I know that I do not need to get the confirmation from somebody else that, yes, that was meaningful, because I know what is meaningful. And if there's one thing I'd like to go ahead and raise at this point, is the ability to be able to recognize something on my own without having to get the confirmation from somebody else. Because at the end, that is the only thing that we could actually rely on. And if there was one message that I would like to leave from my side, based upon this wonderful conversation that I'll be thinking about for a very, very long time, is that we have the ability to make that change for ourselves. And actually, I think the word change or transformation is not even correct. I think we're talking about a realization that these are possibilities that we have. And so either we are able to come to that realization or we're not. And regardless of whatever happens afterwards, that's something that nobody can take away from us. And for that, I feel, in spite of everything that I've done in the past that I've chosen, that is something that I'm extremely proud of. And I think that has everything to do with our subject today. I really do. I should not have the last word. I give that to both of you. And then I would say that if that's okay for both of you, I think that's a wrap for today. So any last words from you, Carolina, Evelyne?
I really enjoyed this. It just made me realize how rare it is that I even visit this with someone, not in my head, because that obviously, as I mentioned, it has a big impact. But I'm completely on board with what Evelyne said. If someone watches, one person watches this and it helps them see or understand what is going on with them, even. Because I remember I did not understand. I did not know what was going on. So if it helps someone understand and then be kinder to themselves because of it, I am more than happy. I'm more than happy to have spent this time with both of you just for the thing itself, but just if it helps someone, just one person, I'm even happier.
Thank you. Evelyne?
Me too. I'm extremely grateful that we had this conversation. I also enjoyed it, even though it's not the easiest of topics, admittedly. I feel very grateful to the both of you. I felt that this was a very appreciative and compassionate, empathetic conversation. So thank you so much. And I also hope that we might be able to shed some light on the topic for other people to understand either what they're going through themselves or what their loved ones are potentially feeling in this situation.